But in introducing George Kraft this time, I want to mention that what his book is about. It's a kind of memoir. It's a kind of life review. And many of us are at a stage of our life where we're thinking about this life review. And I want to mention that there are a number of HAS members that have written memoirs, and there are most of these, I think, are part of the HAS library, and you can check them out. But these are on my own personal copies that I brought. Jack Hyde, the one who does the Lord of Plank film series, he wrote a book, Just Another Brick, How I Survived Over 8,500 School Lunches. Jack Hyde, his life's memories. Dennis Van Heidsma, I think a teacher, administrator, he wrote Windrose, Harvesting the Lessons of Life. Another HAS member of he was a former member and still contributor to the Science, Medicine, and Technology subcommittee, wrote Elephant Baseball, a Missionary Kid's Tale. And George Kraft, we have now with us, A Place to Call Home, a Missionary Kid's Tale. It's like an ongoing series. Maybe there'll be some more missionary kids that will tell their tales.
There's a missionary memoir series that donors gave that is supporting, supporting this ministry. Anonymous donors that are.
Okay. Can everybody hear George okay?
Hear me all right?
Okay, we're good.
Okay, good.
Take it away, George.
Good. Okay. I want to go quickly through the last slides because I get the sense you'd like to get more to the story of missionary kids' struggles spiritually and how we dealt with that. So I'll go through these quickly. Just that's the map that I showed you of Guling, where I spent 3 years. And oops. And these are just some slides of Guling. You can just see how beautiful, why Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong had their summer homes here. One of our favorite spots to go view the valley below. This is just one of the many swimming holes that we love to swim in. That's the school. See if we can. My brother's right here, and I'm hand on chin right there. That's all of my friends, the ones I would play around with and have fun with and do naughty things with after lights out and all that kind of stuff. You know what goes on in boarding schools. Wagans, this is called a wagan. This is the only way you could get up to Guling, was they call it the 1,000 steps. So we get up there, and those are just carrying chairs. So the young children would take the carrying chairs up, and the older children would walk. We've all had this experience, learning how to brave yourself, dive in rather than jump in. And like my dad was such a good diver, he was just another picture there. This is where my dad sort of wowed. The one time he visited us in the 4 years we were there, he wowed people off of this 10-meter platform dive. And there was right there. That's where I learned to swim. Winter in Guling. Yeah, not very good archery form, but as you can see, even then I was a little bit taller than most of boys. I got my size early as a kid. This is Stanley Houghton. This is pretty well-known figure in terms of missionary circles. If you look up missionary statesman, he'd certainly be one monitoring our high jump competition. This is mom and dad coming out of Kangding. Remember I mentioned that the communists had taken over October 1st, 1949. And in the Christmas of 50, for some reason, they decided that my brother and I would try to get up to Kangding. Wild idea, really, wouldn't work. This was our little sister, of course, we had never seen. She's a trailer, came along 10 years later, so we were anxious to see her. Home on furlough. That's my parents were deciding where to go after China. When China closed, it became the Overseas Missionary Fellowship. So they went into Japan, the Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia. My parents decided to go back to Taiwan. I'm skipping 20 years of my parents' life in Taiwan. Don't have the time to cover that, but they were missionaries in Taiwan for 20 years. Now I went, and so 1951, I went to the mission home in Wheaton, Illinois. And these were the residents of the home. We had our legal guardian up there in the top, so in some ways we're all like brothers and sisters. And that's the group that's the gang that grew up in Wheaton. Just some pictures of high school. I sang in a brass quartet. Some of you that have been around Hope College for a while might be interested in. See if anybody recognize this guy right here, Dr. Merrill Westfall. He was chair of our philosophy department for 7 years. That's Merrill. We sang in a quartet. He was our quarterback on the football team and our point guard in basketball. Very, very good basketball player. And anyway, that's Merrill. Well, just a picture of me. I think you can see that I was a year older than most people. It kind of helped out. I was able to, I still remember, I remember this picture. We were playing Immaculate Conception, a Catholic private school league. I think that kid weighed 130 pounds soaking wet. And I was 186 foot 185. So hardly, and that was good. That was good tackling for him back then. Lead with your head, put your head straight into the gut of the person. Now, of course, you don't lead with your head. We got too many, with concussion protocols. That's not a good tackling form. Those of you that know Robbie, this is the love of my life right here. Took me 3 years to convince her that I was worth paying attention to at Wheaton College, but I always accused her of paying me no attention, which she really didn't until our senior year. And then when I was co-captain of the football team and ROTC cadet commander, she decided maybe this guy had something going for him that I need to double check out again. This is Dr. V. Raymond Edmond, kind of a well-known president at Wheaton. In love, of course. Finally, I snared her in our senior year. Picture of my dad. What do you think? What do you think I see in that? First thing I see in that picture is my dad's hands. They were just twice the size of mine and just strong as an ox. I mean, he could take you with one hand, and even when he was in his 80s, he could pretty much crush your hand. Just a strong man. Those of you that live in Holland know that Robbie and I have done we'd actually done over 400 programs. First program we did was Stephen Foster. And my name is Stephen Foster. I've been called America's foremost composer and troubadour, best known for my songs of the South, songs like Wait Up on the Swanee River, Middle Kentucky Home, and Old Black Joe, but actually only 30 of 212 songs that I wrote had any connection to Ethiopian music at all. That's the opening paragraph of my monologue on Stephen Foster. And then we did one called Hymns of Mother Taught Me. We have one on Charles Wesley, Rodgers and Hammerstein, Lerner and Lowe, George Gershwin. I love doing this historical research on these guys. So put these programs together. This is I organized an exchange in football between the University of Querétaro, which is our sister university in Mexico, and Hope. And it's also our sister city. This is we have one grandchild. It's our granddaughter there carrying the American flag. And a serendipitous thing, we were down there for 2 weeks, and I didn't know, what are we going to do with Jenna for 2 weeks, while I'm working on football and doing all that kind of stuff. And the man who sort of bankrolls the football program at the University of Querétaro, he and his wife came and said, would you be willing if Jenna came and stayed with our 2 daughters for 2 weeks? My prayers were answered. So she stayed with them for 2 weeks and just had a wonderful time. I still get together with friends. I think most of you have been around here know Jack and my good friend Sheldon Weddick, who passed away. Bob Ritzma. We get together every Friday. We get together in Bob's home now because he's incapable of he's pretty much homebound for those of you from Third Church. We get together, and then of course me. Dick and me, 2012, we took a return trip to Tibet, and there's just a picture of us with 3 Tibetan children. This is a part. One difference between Wheaton and Hope is Wheaton College since the mid 50s has had an ROTC program. fact, when I was at Wheaton, every man at Wheaton had a dress green uniform courtesy of Uncle Sam, and you had to take 4 semesters of ROTC. So for your first 4 semesters, everybody took ROTC. Now it's a voluntary involvement, but I was stationed in Germany. I was going to talk a little bit about everybody knows about Checkpoint Charlie, but they don't know so much about Checkpoint Alpha and Bravo. Alpha's at Helmstedt between East Germany and West Germany. And the Checkpoint Bravo is between East Germany and West Berlin. And then of course, Checkpoint Charlie is between East and West Berlin. And I was stationed as one of the officers in charge of Checkpoint Charlie when I was in the Army. I was there when President Kennedy gave his famous Ich bin ein Berliner speech. I'm not much of a photographer, but you can certainly see the profile there of John F. Kennedy. This is a view. This is where I spent a lot of my time up on the wall. This is looking down the wall. We looked over at the hutch where the East Germans had would process people. And there were several incidents when I was there, but won't take time to talk about those now. I put this picture on the cover of the book. I think it was really my privilege to really work with these 3 guys. Russ DeVette, who some of you old timers will remember Russ, and of course, Ray Smith and Jim Bolton. And I consider that to be one of the most enjoyable experiences of my life, was coaching football for 30 years, 15 years with this group. And that was back when we had 4 coaches. Now you look at the sideline. How many coaches are on the sideline now? Maybe 12 or 13. It's unbelievable how many coaches you now have. Anyway, it was the 4 of us. Of course, Ray was a head coach. Russ was defensive coordinator. And I coached the offensive line, and Jim coached the defensive backs. No football coaches allowed. We took 2 sabbaticals to England back when I was at Hope. You pretty much had to leave, not only leave Holland, but they encouraged you to leave the country when you took a sabbatical. So we spent 2, 1974, 1980 in England. And I thought this was an interesting sign. That sign make sense to you? No? What's football in America? Soccer. What's a coach in America? A bus. No football buses allowed. And the reason for this was that especially the Glasgow Celtics, okay? The young guys would get on these buses, 3 or 4 in a row, and they would have the kegs of beer all the way down the center of the bus, and they'd drink all the way to London. And we lived 3 blocks from the Arsenal Gunners Stadium, and I loved to watch the Arsenal Gunners play football or soccer, as we call it. So they'd arrive in London completely drunk. They would literally park their buses about half mile from the stadium and then pub hop to the stadium. So by the time they got to the game, they were completely inebriated. So they were don't bother to stop at our what they call lay-bys. I don't know, it's a magnificent ever that. But anyway, we all came to Hope College in '67. So in the 50th anniversary in 2017, I threw a little party at our place and had these people come over. And Cotter Theron, of course, has now passed away. And Sheldon has, and Rick Vandeveld has, but the rest of us are still hanging in there. So that's the group of us just there for a celebration. Jim and I try to act like we know what we're doing up in a crow's nest. I think that might be Albion. I'm not sure. Finally, just some pictures. Remember the picture I had of my dad in that winter coat preaching to the group? This is that same room in 2012. Yeah, so it's still there. I couldn't believe that it was still there. And anyway, that's that spot. I wouldn't mind taking a whole presentation on the life of Eric Little. And it's pronounced Little, like John Cox's parents were called Liddell. It's Eric Little. And 100 years ago in Paris, he won that Olympic gold in the 400-meter dash. And of course, he's well known for that. But really, his life after that, he went to China as a missionary, and he taught missionary kids like me. They were trapped in the Shantung compound that I mentioned in that handout that I gave you. And the missionary, he became Uncle Eric to the missionary kids that were trapped in that compound. Wonderful story of a wonderful man. I'm not a hero worshiper, but if I was, he would be my hero. He literally gave his life for those. He died in the concentration camp, and he gave his life for those missionary kids. That was his one of his many contributions. Where my parents' house used to be is now this church. Interesting photo at the Panda Preserve in Chengdu. We just got 2 new pandas at San Diego Zoo. You probably saw that in the paper. But all things bright and beautiful, all creatures, all things wise and wonderful. What happened to the last line? What's the last line? The Lord God made them all. I just decided to leave that particular line off of that. But this is at the entrance to the Panda Preserve in Chengdu. Just some pictures. I love pandas. I didn't know there was red pandas until about 10 years ago. They had a lot of red pandas too. This is a nomadic dwelling. This would be exactly where my dad spent so much time talking, sharing the gospel, except for the motorbike. See his motorbike down there? That's like it was 100 years ago. You know, same tents, same setup. This is interesting. This is my brother, who's an amputee. And every time we got in an airplane, they wrapped up his crutches. And if you remember about 2012, the Uyghurs that are really persecuted severely by the Chinese, way in Western Tibet, they got on board a plane. And if you remember this, they all got on crutches and they broke their crutches and started stabbing people. There was quite a melee. So they decided that everybody that had crutches was to get them packed up. My poor brother's there. And this is our tour guide. What am I going to do? You know, got an amputee here with his crutches all packed up. Kite capital of the world. In fact, when we were at the kite capital, they gave us all a little one of these. So it gets this little memento from Weixin where they just make, it's just unbelievable, the kites that the Chinese can make. Interesting story here. Be quickly on it. The concentration camp where Eric Little really gave his life, August in 45. That's when Hirohito went on the radio and said, we are surrendering to the Allied forces. And so the kids of the mission, the kids there are the people in the Shantung compound. They heard this plane going overhead, and they could tell it wasn't the normal sounds. They raced out into the courtyard, and they saw in the fuselage that it was an American plane, and they were so excited. They bust out there, and down. This is the second or third day where they're bringing in supplies. But the first day, 7 paratroopers came out, and the lead paratrooper is a guy named Lieutenant Jim Moore. And he was the translator for the group. And you know why? He was a graduate of the chief of schools, and then he got into the service. So he kind of served as translator for that group on Liberation Day. Church, when we were there, this church had just opened up again. And this is the new pastor. He was so excited about this church opening up. And the parents of 3 of the kids on our trip, they'd been married in this church. This is sort of the flagship church in Shanghai. Pastor there. This is me years later at the same grotto there where we used to swim. This is a group of us part of some of the missionary kids. They went back there. So 61 years after leaving China, a group of us missionary kids went back. We organized a trip to go see the different places where we had been. So that's just a quick run through of things. Hopefully you found that a little bit informative and interesting. And so I decided I want to go to some of the struggles that I mentioned. We do talk a little bit about this type of missionary kids. And I'm going to start with something that I thought maybe I wouldn't do this, but because it's going to take a while, but I want to do this. How many of you have heard of Wesley Stafford or Compassion International? compassionate. He's Wheaton grad, and he was in Africa. He was a missionary kid in Africa, and he sounded Compassion International. I didn't know this. My son is coming. We're in the process right now, moving to the farmstead, and our son is here kind of helping us. And I didn't realize till last night that he supports 6 kids from Compassion International, about $400 a month. He's actually really committed to that. And Matthew Stafford has been committed to providing as best he can to provide a quality life for kids that have been left in garbage dumps and left in, particularly African kids, since he was a missionary kid that was born and raised in Africa. But real quickly, I'm going to read his story. At a turning point in my life in 2007, I realized that I needed to allow God to redeem the story of my childhood. That story was so painfully confusing that it did not speak about it for 35 years. Where did my prayers go? My cries for mercy and rescue screamed into my pillow. Did I have the laziest guardian angel in all of heaven? I received my calling, my purpose, and my life's mission in my darkest and most painful moment in about 90 seconds at age 10. The moment involved a pink birthday candle, one that had been trimmed with a pocket knife at the blunt end so that it could burn from both directions. The wicks were lit by the man who had authority over me, the house parent of a boarding school for the children of missionaries in West Africa. School had been my home for 9 months, each year since I was 6 years old. My whole life can be divided into 2 parts, BC, before the candle, and AD, after the damage. The house parents had marched me to the school's dining hall, dragged a metal chair across the concrete floor, and slammed it down in front of my schoolmates. He threw me up on the chair and jammed the candle in my hand. Children, he said, you cannot serve God and Satan. Wesley has tried. You cannot burn a candle at both ends without getting burned. Watch what happens when you try. The children stared in silence. Nobody dared breathe. Striking a match, the man lit both wicks. Watch. Standing on that chair, my knees knocking, I stared incredulously at the candle in my shaking fingers as I contemplated what this would mean. Beyond the 2 flames, I could see the face of my friends, children who, like me, had been gathered up from many mission stations throughout West Africa. Policy dictated that all missionary kids leave their parents at age 6 and travel a week by truck to this isolated jungle school. They, like me, had unspeakable cruelty in this place. The people in charge were missionaries who had gone to Africa to save souls, but I don't know, perhaps didn't measure up linguistically or cross-culturally, so instead had been assigned to the least desirable task in the field, that of raising children. Unsupervised, they took out their frustration and rage on the most convenient targets, the children in their charge. I learned early that terrible things can happen when children are deemed unimportant, lowest of priorities. The stage for this horrendous moment had been set by 4 years of abuse. For all my young life at the school, I had endured beatings daily. Belt buckles and tire thread sandals had bruised and torn my flesh since age 6. There were a million ways to earn a beating here, infractions like a wrinkle in the bedspread or an open eye during nap time. At age 9, we learned in math class how to average. The most recurring theme my whole life I could think of was how many times I'd been beaten. For the span of weeks, I kept track of my beatings, hiding the tally under my pillow. When I did the math, I discovered that I'd been beaten an average of 17 times a week. The boarding school staff abused us in every way a child could be abused, not only physically and emotionally, but spiritually as well. We were terrified of their powerful and vengeful God and reminded daily that we were little sinners in the hands of their angry God. There was no one to protect us. We had no advocates, no arms to run to. The very people who should have been our defenders were in fact our attackers. And now standing on that chair with the candle gripped between my fingers, I was at my lowest, darkest moment. I cannot describe the cumulative hurt, rage, and hopelessness that welled up and racked my 10-year-old soul. At this man's hand, I had always lost. Plain and simple, he was bigger and stronger. He was a man. I was a boy. He spoke angrily to the assembled children. This boy here is Satan's tool. He told, and the devil used him to destroy his parents' ministry. That's important. There will be Africans in hell because of Wesley. Hearing those words, there arose in me a rage, a passion I'd never ever experienced before and have not since. I felt I could endure almost my treatment, endure almost any treatment in his hands I had for years. This candle incident was different. Never had words cut so deeply. Yes, I had told. As a desperate boy, I had cried out to my mother for help. For years, 50 of us children had courageously maintained our silence. We were repeatedly told, if you tell what happens here, you will destroy your parents' ministry. Our abusers used our love for God, for our parents, and for Africans to secure our silence about the horrors of that place. They led us home every Sunday, but we couldn't tell or even hint at our loneliness or the abuse. Our letters were censored, and the slightest attempt to cry out resulting in a beating, then a forced rewriting of the letter. We learned to be silent as lambs. We had no idea what our silence perpetrated evil against us. Even during the 3 months home with our parents every year, we all kept silent. We loved them so much. We knew how passionately they spread the gospel. And I loved my African village friends. If my silence could win their salvation, I would endure anything. At school, we were not allowed to have pictures of our parents or to cry for homesickness. Each year, my mind would capture a final image of my parents saying goodbye. The first month, I could see them every time I closed my eyes. And at the tender age of 6, 7, and 8, I couldn't help crying myself to sleep every night as silently as possible. But by the 9th month of school, I could no longer remember what my parents looked like. I was so afraid I would break their hearts by not recognizing them when I went home. The crime that led to this burning candle happened at age 10. After a year on furlough in the United States, I found myself at the airport with other MKs saying goodbye to my parents. We were about to board a propeller plane that would take us back to Africa, and our parents would follow by ship. At the gate, I took my mother's face in my hands and couldn't let go. I stared intently at her beautiful, kind face. What are you doing, Wesley? Mommy, I just don't want to forget what you look like. She dissolved into tears, and so did I. I saw a moment of opportunity, a glimmer of hope for rescue. In 30 seconds, I blurted out my plea. Mommy, please don't send me back. Please don't send me back. They hate me. They beat me. I'm scared. I beg. Please, please. I will never forget the look of horror in my mother's eyes. What, she gasped? She held me tightly. What can I do? I could feel her sobbing in my embrace. About a minute later, my sister and I were whisked away from the other children. My friends who had overheard looked at me with dead men walking in their eyes. They didn't want to even be near me for fear of sharing the punishment. I had done the unthinkable. I had broken the code of silence. During my parents' month-long voyage at sea, mother, brokenhearted and confused, had an emotional psychological breakdown. Upon arriving in Africa, she was soon sent back to the United States for treatment. Word of her illness and what had caused it spread like wildfire. When the news reached the boarding school, the staff was enraged. I had resigned myself to the coming humiliation. In minutes, I would scream and throw down the candle until I heard his last phrase. Parents, ministry ruined. Africans in hell because of Wesley. That broke my heart more than the humiliation, more than any pain that may come my way ever could. I loved Africans. In my heart, I was African. Every summer, my spirit was restored by the loving kindness of the poverty-stricken Africans in my village. I never fell down during those 3 months without an African woman swooping me up and to wipe away the tears from my eyes. I used to pray every night in that village, Lord, if you love me, let me wake up black tomorrow, like all my friends. I know you can do this. I would check every morning to see if I had been turned black, only to be disappointed. But maybe tomorrow. As the flames licked closer to my skin, from the deep within me arose a gust of strength I cannot fully explain to this day. I had a desperate thought. I could win this time. This time, the house parent had admittedly put himself in a place where I could actually win. I could endure enough pain. I knew in my heart that he was wrong. He was lying, and I felt the evil and injustice at the core of my soul. I was not Satan's tool. I was a little boy with a broken heart who had found his voice and cried out for rescue. So enough shame. Nothing was going to make me cry or drop that candle. This is where I would take my stand. This was my little Masada. I shook violently, tears brimming in anticipation of burned flesh. He turned his back on me, his tirade growing in intensity, but I could no longer hear his voice. All I could hear was the pulsing of blood in my ears. I clenched my teeth, tightened my muscles in my body, and pinched the candle as fiercely as I could. I stared at the edges of my fingers, turned red. Blister popped up. I was transformed out of my body. I floated above the terrified boy, watching as if it were happening to someone else. I saw wisps of smoke rise up on either side of my fingers. I would not let go. Just then, a child in the front row couldn't stand it any longer. He jumped up and slapped the candle out of my hand. The children scattered in all directions. The meeting was over, but standing there alone on my chair, I had received my calling. In an instant, I had gone from victim to victor. From that day forward, I would protect children. I would forever speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. I think I'll stop reading it there. Yeah, I'd like to say that was a one-off. That was not a one-off. The situation with Catholic boys being molested 10 times worse in mission schools, 10 times worse. It's just the nature of the cloister. You're sort of separated. You're 35, 40 young children with, and unfortunately, missions. Wesley's right. Missions. They would appoint people who couldn't be effective as missionaries. Anybody could raise 35 or 40 kids. Anybody could do that. That's not a challenge. So you take the missionaries that were not effective as missionaries, either couldn't learn the language or couldn't relate, and you would make them the guardians of other kids. And one of the dearest people I know is my sister-in-law, who passed away from cancer about 10 years ago. But she grew up in Mission in Quito, Ecuador. Unbelievable. Mission in Quito, Ecuador. So it wasn't just one or two, not isolated incidents. It just is frightening to it. But actually going in the name of God, and I took the time to read the school. I think Wesley Stafford did a pretty nice job of explaining it. I thought I'm going to share my story a little bit here. I think to set the stage for my story, when I left for China, my aunt Helen, she had no children of her own, so I got this stamp book in 1945, November 45. I think every kid had missionaries had stamp collections, and in this book I have 2,500 different stamps from 150 different countries. So and you took great pride in your stamp collection, and that'll be a part of my story. Anyway, that was one, and then something else I'll just share. Did I show you did I ever show you this book of our hymn? This is our hymnal that we had. We sang. It's called the Golden Bells. Got 600 hymns. And so every night from first grade through 12th grade, every day we would sing from this hymnal. So when you sing, that's 12. I'd say we sang probably 3 or 4 hymns a morning or an evening. So over 12 years, you've learned hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hymns. So this was the hymn book that we all had. And in our nightstand by our by everybody's bed, we had a copy of the hymnal with just the words only. And the last thing we did at night before we went to sleep was we could choose 2 or 3 hymns to sing. What do you think were our favorite hymns? Let me see. One of our favorites was Charles Wesley's "Oh, for 1,000 tongues to sing my great Redeemer's praise." Now, why would 9 and 10, 11-year-old boys pick that one? Well, it had interesting English. It's, "Oh, for 1,000 tongues to sing my great Redeemer's praise." It went on and on and on, kind of like the Messiah. It has 17 verses, and we could let the lights out for another 15 minutes just asking for that hymn alone. It had nothing to do with the theology whatsoever. So we would pick based upon length and how long we could, delay the whole situation with the lights out. So anyway, those 3 things I'll just use to start my story. So when I was about 8 years old, and my stamp collection, I had one of the better stamp collections because of my Aunt Helen. She would send us just scores of stamps all the time. But I had a kid, Frank Armstrong, he was from Australia, and he had some really nice Australian stamps. Okay, and he wouldn't trade them with me, just wouldn't trade them. So one night after lights out, I snuck into his locker, and I stole about 15 of Australia's finest stamps and took them. Well, he reported it the next morning, and of course after the theft was reported, I can still remember the night afterwards. All the boys around our grade, we met. There was about 30 or 40 of us, and we sat there, and this is my Stafford story. We sat there, and night after night, it went on for about 2 or 3 nights. They were desperately trying to identify the sinner. And they didn't say thief, I said sinner. Who's the sinner? The sinner, we're going to root out. And I remember sitting there, night after night after night, wondering, shall I confess or shall I not confess my sin? I knew if I confessed, that they would let my parents know and everything. And so I sat there night after night, and I decided to remain silent. So since I remained, after this whole would have all died down, I knew I had committed the unpardonable sin. I had not confessed sin, and as a result that I was damned for hell. And so for several, it's hard to believe, I'd say for 4 to 5 years, my prayer every night was, now lay me down to sleep. I asked the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, please take me to heaven. Die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. Oh, what a terrible prayer for a kid to be praying for 3 or 4 years. And you see how, and John knows this story a little bit. But one of the theological concepts we were taught was the age of accountability. Any of you heard of the age of accountability? Some of you have it. That all children go to heaven, but at a certain age, when you start to know right from wrong, and that can vary depending upon the maturity level of the child. At that point in time, if you harbor unconfessed sin, you then go straight to hell. So if you play that out, 6 years of age, maybe 4 months, at noon, you're going to heaven. 1 minute after noon, you're going to hell. Sometime for every child. So I knew I was damned to hell. In fact, often, as I think of my favorite musical is Les Miserables. How many of you have seen that? I've seen it more times than I care to admit. The story of Jean Valjean and Javert is such a powerful story. And anyway, if you remember the situation with, it was in a courtroom with Jean Valjean, and there was another person they'd identified that they were sure was Jean Valjean, and this man was going to go to prison instead of Jean Valjean. And as they were in the courtroom giving the sentence, Jean Valjean, this man bears no more guilt than you. Who am I? I'm Jean Valjean. 24601, and he rips open his tunic. So at that moment of crisis, Jean Valjean, if I speak and condemned. If I stay silent, I am damned. So Jean Valjean chose to speak and be condemned. I chose to stay silent, so I knew I was damned. And so I lived for, years with this and years through China, and then went to the mission in Wheaton, Illinois. And I can remember memorizing the passage of scripture. If you confess with your mouth, if you believe in your heart the Lord Jesus, and confess with your mouth that God has raised him from the dead, thou shalt be saved. You must confess with your mouth. It says it right there in the good book of, the good book. The King James Version says that. And I never was willing to confess with the mouth, because what would other kids think? I wasn't a Christian. I'd ask Christ to give me Jesus to give me a hard time after time after time. Never felt that strangely warmed that John Wesley talks about. So I knew that it wasn't a genuine conversion. But I knew that I was destined to hell unless I confessed with my mouth publicly. It sounds strange as an adult, but that's what I was going through. And I can still remember I went to ever heard of Camp Awana? I went to a Camp Awana when I was a kid, and Lance Latham, a guy out of Oak Park, Illinois, founded Camp Awana. And I would get converted at Camp Awana every summer. Okay, but my heart it was like hitting the sawdust trail. But my heart was never strangely warm, so I knew it wasn't genuine. Well, finally, I remember Lance Latham at one of the meetings in Oak Park said, "Is there anybody here that was saved at the last summer and that would be willing to confess with their mouth and share their conversion experience?" And I said, "It's about time." So I timidly raised my hand. And I can still remember that's one of the most frightening days of my life, sitting there for that half hour, realizing that in another 10 minutes, he was going to call me, and I'd have to stand up in front of 200 or 300 people and sort of confess that I had not been a Christian, until I went to Camp One. Screwed up theology, really. But anyway, so finally this hung over my head. And finally, I remember I was about 13 years old, 14, and I was in a room with my brother. And I finally just blurted out, "How do you guys know that you're saved?" And they looked at me like they didn't even know what I was talking about. "What are you talking about?" And then I did sort of start to say, "Well, something's two is not adding to four. What's going on here?" Even my brother doesn't know what I'm talking about. It was so unique to me. I don't know why for me it was such a burden and such a concern, but it was. And then, of course, as I got older, then I processed out of it. Went to Wheaton College, then came to Hope College, and took the Bethel Bible series. Anybody here take the Bethel Bible series? My wife and I took it, and I taught it twice in Christ Memorial. We had Don Hoekstra as our teacher, tremendous, did an absolutely fabulous job teaching the Bethel Bible series to us. And it was huh? You were, well, Jim and Marty Bultman were in there, and Carl Van Krimpen was in there.
I was in the Hoekstra class.
You were in the which one?
In the Hoekstra class.
Oh,
I was
okay.
a student when you were.
Okay, good. Yeah, well, didn't you remember that well? I thought he was an excellent teacher. Did you too? I thought, and I took it, but it was, what I was going to say was, Harley Swigum from University of Wisconsin was the publisher. He wrote the Bethel Bible series. Robbie and I met him, took him out to dinner. In fact, when Don had him come here to Holland. And what they did in Bethel that I really appreciated, you think I'd have done this before with all the Bible training. Before you read any passages of scripture, please do the who, what, where, when, and how. Do your hermeneutic. Make some sense out of the passage of scripture. Don't just memorize it. Figure out what in the heck is the context of it. Who was written, why was it written, for whom was it written, those important questions. And Don really helped us process through that. So that was a very enlightening moment for me, as I thought that was very meaningful to both take and teach. And then, as I got to be older and as I'm going through my years at Hope College, I came from Wheaton with a kind of a zeal for Christ. And that was when I was a Wheaton grad with that sort of vim and vigor of a Wheaton grad, so I had no problem passing muster, to come to Hope College, although Cal Vanderwerf, the president at the time, didn't. He was more interested in the academic qualifications of the faculty than the religious anyway, but I was good in both. I'd gone to Indiana University, which is a darn good graduate school program in physical education. But as I process through, just to make the story quickly, so I could open it up for discussion, and this gets me to Frank Kraft, John, and Frank Kraft was in our men's group for years and years and years, and we're going to deeply miss Frank. What a wonderful, those of you who didn't know Frank really missed an opportunity to get to know a wonderful, marvelous man. He really was. And there's so many. We'll have tomorrow morning we're meeting, and we'll have so many stories about Frank, won't we, John? It'll be quite a session. But anyway, Gene, how many of you knew Gene Westra? Gene was in our group for years and years, and Gene was an avowed universalist. He really believed that God was going to call all humanity, all humankind, into His loving arms at the end of the day, at the end of creation. And I'd read quite a bit of Charles Barclay's. I'm familiar with the Scottish theologian Charles Barclay. I said Charles. I said, don't do Charles. Oh dear, William. A little difference, Charles. Yeah, having said that, I was going to start today with a little humor. I was going to start today. John Patton Ryan, did I call this a llama? Hey, I'm 3 years old and Joe Biden. Give me a break, will you? Okay. Anyway, yeah, thank you, William Barton.
What is that animal?
This is a yak, a Y-A-K.
Okay.
This is the animal that Tibet couldn't exist without the yak. It provides them with everything that they need. And that my dad must have bought that in Tibet. I don't even know where I got it. But anyway, thank you, William. I keep saying, I'm going to make the mistake of saying Charles Barkley. Oh boy. Anyway, William Barclay. I just like to, this is the memory of Gene Westra. John, I just wanted to share. Here's just a short passage from William Barclay's spiritual autobiography. I believe implicitly in the ultimate triumph of God, the time when all things will be subject to Him, and when God will be everything to everyone. Gives the passage of Scripture. For me, this has certain consequences. If one man remains outside the love of God at the end of time, it means that one man has defeated the love of God, and that is impossible. Further, there's only one way in which we can think of the triumph of God. If God was no more than a king or a judge, then it would be possible to speak of his triumph if his enemies were agonizing in hell or were totally and completely obliterated and wiped out. But God is not only king and judge, God is Father. And I emphasize, put that in italics. God is Father. The emphasis is mine. He is indeed Father more than anything else. No father could be happy while there were members of his family forever in agony. No father would count it a triumph to obliterate the disobedient members of his family. The only triumph a father can know is to have all his family back home. The only victory love can enjoy is the day when its offer of love is answered by the return of love. The only possible final triumph is a universe loved by and in love with God. He states it pretty clearly. Like I said, God is going to welcome us all home. Welcome all Tibetans. All Tibetans, the ones that rejected my dad's call and the ones that didn't. And most didn't, as somebody shared last time, the batting average was very, 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 very low as far as particularly in Tibet. In Taiwan, it was a little different, but up in Tibet, it was another story. We're dealing with the Tibetans. And as I think back for me, I think this is the only place I could really, with my story, my journey, it's the only place it really could end for me. Either there or like my brother and sister, where they just have abandoned it completely. And I'm just not quite ready to do that. My sister sent me something here just a week or so ago. If I can find it here. Here's going to know this is the tongue-in-cheek definition of a missionary. Okay, you can think about this one. Sure, all missions are inherently patronizing to the host culture. That's what a mission is. A bunch of strangers showing up somewhere uninvited to inform the locals they are wrong. That's what my sister sent me the other day. Well, process that one, I don't know. Let me just see if there's anything else I was pressing you're going to mention before we open it up. I'd like to just read I skipped over the whole part of the whole part of my life pretty quickly, but I was, any of you know Jeff Reynolds, who's the archivist for Hope, about 2017, he said, George, I'd like to interview you on your life as a missionary kid. And then if we have some time, let's get into your life at Hope College. I said, sure, I'd be happy to. So for about 2 to 3 hours, Jeff and I just had a conversation going back and forth. The whole thing is in the archives. If you're interested, you go in the archives reading it. But at the end of my talk about being a missionary, he said, George, it seems to me that before you came to Hope College, you never really had a home. And I'd never ever thought of that question. It honestly never entered my mind until 6 years ago. And I can remember I'd sort of sat, and I can remember a tear started to come to my eye a little bit. And I said, yeah. And that's why Hope College has been so important to me. I mean, there's people I showed you those pictures of. They love me unconditionally. Okay, I never really experienced that. And to have that. I mean, I was a young coach and teacher, and John knows this. I thought I had all the answers to things. Young buck out of wheat, and I'm ready to share my knowledge and my intelligence. But they put up with me. They accepted me. Russ could be pretty Russ Tibet. He could be pretty hard on you, but I always knew he sort of loved me and accepted me for who I was, and that was very meaningful to me. So that really is sort of the struggle that I had, and so it's more of a spiritual situation. In fact, if I could have taken that facet out of my childhood, what a joyful childhood I had. Kids every day to play with, every day you could organize things. I loved the boarding school environment, just fantastic. Everything about it was positive. But anyway, that's my story. And I sort of challenge some of you to maybe talk about your journey, your journey of the spirit. Anybody want to maybe just as you've thought about that, maybe how your throughout your spiritual journey is taken? Anybody want to make a comment or ask me a question?
I want to ask a question. I want to ask a question about your brother Dick. You mentioned that he was a double amputee.
Yeah.
How did that happen? If it's not too difficult for you to talk about that, is it related to?
No, well, no, he was like Frank Cry. He had polio. Remember back in the
Oh,
52,
okay.
where Frank apparently, as I read in the paper, had polio in that summer of 52. He had a mild case of polio, so we followed that. But he's like my dad. He loved mountaineering. He loved climbing. He's run several marathons. He's run the Boston Marathon, and those kinds of things were not good for somebody that had polio at 52. So he exacerbated the situation. And what happened was he was climbing Mount McKinley. He got to the top of Mount McKinley, and on rappelling the way down, slipped and fell about 30 or 40 feet and just kind of wrenched his ankle. And they tried to do surgery. It didn't work. So they finally, to make a long story short, he did nothing about it. On Christmas Eve, about 12 years ago, gangrene started to move up his leg. So on December 24th, it was an emergency surgery by the night doctor. We didn't even have a boom, just like a boom boom when they took it off on the night of the 24th. So that's how we.
Okay, thank you. Someone here had a comment.
So George, just for clarity, the story you read was the guy holding a candle. That was somebody else. That was not you, right?
No. Oh,
Wesley was his
this
name.
is Wesley Stafford is the founder a group called Compassion International.
Okay.
This was written up in Christianity Today. Oh, I don't have the issue right here. I think in two thousand.
Yeah, that answers my
Yeah,
question.
this was Wesley Stafford's story.
So your story was the thing that you wrestled with for years was the theft of 12 stamps. Am I right?
Yeah, the whole thing started. It
And,
started
and
with the-
because you didn't confess that you did it.
started with the theological garbage like Age of Accountability and that kind of stuff. And then theft, unconfessed sin. Unconfessed sin, you're on your way to Gehenna, to use a word that John knows. a heck of a lot
And it
more than
wouldn't
I
have
do.
been a relief to confess that, I'm asking. It
What-
seems
what-
like it would be, oh, I'll admit to it, I'll get punished and it'll be over with.
Yeah, yeah. You know, having said that, this is interesting because, Bill, I had my britches lowered and got my bottom whacked on many occasions. But it was almost like I deserved that. It was a badge of honor. I could drop my drawers and the kids could see, that I endured this without crying. And so that was deserved. I was naughty. I organized something that should have been done. But the spiritual is if you've been raised in covenant theology, you don't know what I'm talking about. It's foreign to people in the Reformed Church. You're born into the family of God, and you are a member of the family of God. You just are. You're born into it. So this idea of, that I experienced it's hard for people to understand, but yet I just struggled with it. It was just, I'm not exaggerating. There were times where it's the most dramatic moments of my life were those times. Huh? Yeah.
In the boarding school, what was the responsibility of the people there, the administrators, to communicate to your family, to the children's family? On all those pictures, everyone looks very happy. They're all smiling. And I
Right.
kind of wonder if everyone was always very happy. I mean, did the school write notes to the parents every couple months and say how the child was doing? Or did they have help if they were emotionally not, even in today's world, when you send your kid away to school, sometimes, it's hard to go away from home.
Yeah.
And so what's the help that you get? Or what did did they write to your parents or communicate?
They censored all of our letters. They censored every letter. It's like with Wesley Stafford, our letters were censored. So if we said anything that's
Writing, but
yeah, they would censor that out.
writing your parents.
No,
Say,
they
oh,
they
George
would
is
do,
doing
no,
very
there
well,
was no
yes.
communication there. I don't know if I should share this or not, but I think I will. One more story. My dear sister's 10 years younger than me. And different guardians had taken over the mission school in Wheaton, and she was molested as a child. And I didn't know about it until 10 years later. And I've only seen my sister cry once. And that was when she told me about that. And what made it particularly tough, and this, I've never shared this before in public. And my sister said, don't go in the book, but you're here. My dad was up in the administration of the mission. So they contacted my father about it, and my father just, as you can imagine, spent a night in prayer and decided that this would be resolved in-house. That he and Lois would work it out together. And but then a year later, that same missionary was now reassigned to Taiwan, where Dad was the superintendent. And at that time, this gentleman was caught with a Taiwanese girl on his lap, getting ready for whatever. And my dad fired the man on the spot. And so the only thing my sister could think was the life of a Taiwanese girl. That hampered the ministry of the gospel. We're there in China to minister the gospel, but with my own daughter, we'll work it out in-house. So you can imagine how my sister interpreted that. That was part of her reason for just bolting the faith. So it's tough. I mean, yeah, you just, no, the communication was just, every letter was censored, like Stafford said in his African school. You just didn't, yeah, it was, I just, my father was, as you can tell by now, my father was a powerful man, just, I'll just read you something here that, here's my dad. Don Lyons decided to put a pretty extended letter that my dad wrote for the church magazine, the East Days of Millions. Here's my last, it's about 3 pages, the last line. Now little sister has reached junior high school age and has stayed home to continue her schooling. Tears flowed for about 10 minutes at mom's leaving. But big brother took her under his wing, and she too is fitting happily into life at the China Mission's home. The wholesomeness and naturalness of her adjustment period was uncovered, but it was learned that her 2 brothers not only used therapy of prayer, but also escorted her to a few games, even visiting the Harlem Globetrotters. That's my dad's. And here's just one more thing that my brother reacted to. Most American missions provide schooling for children on the field right through high school. It'd be a tragedy. It would be a tragic and a shattering thing to me personally if we should lose some of the more able young couples now with us through any administrative failure. And we were losing. The China Mission lost missionaries because I'm not going to spend 4 years away from my kids. I said I saw my parents 7th, 11th, and junior year in college. And they said, that's not the mission for me. I'll go into the Reformed Church or the Christian Reformed Church and be a missionary. But anyway, and the dad said, your prayers, he's one of my here. George and Dick seem to sail through these critical years with aplomb. But our failure to make really adequate provisions for Lois' deepest needs has made me somewhat more sympathetic with those parents who have taken issue with our basic policy. Here's my brother's reaction. On a personal level, I object to my father's words. George and Dick seem to sail through these critical years with aplomb. As all of us can attest that our dad was not very insightful when it came to either self-analysis and emotion of others. That's very accurate description by my brother. His letters had zero insight into the strength it took as a child and adolescent to be torn apart from my parents and never really know what it meant to grow up in a secure family. His words are based on a lifetime of letters each week, assuring our parents that we are fine. We are fine. We are fine. That was the acceptable term. Many letters, and actually there's been a book written called Letters Never Sent or Letters Written Home. You could read the book. Many letters throughout the childhood and adolescence were censored by teachers or house parents, so we seldom ever shared our loneliness and our anxiety. So that's my brother's comment on what you asked. Yeah.
George, 2 questions. One is just more,
Yeah,
I guess, academic.
yeah,
And then I'll follow that up with another. But you were the wrestling coach at Hope
Yeah.
when I was here.
Yeah.
And then I believe in 78 with Title IX, Hope decided to disband its wrestling program. Is that correct?
well, it might have something to do with Title IX, but it was dying in our league.
Okay.
The only other school that had wrestling was Olivet. So we only had 2 schools, Little Rock College in the state of Michigan, that had wrestling. So we had to make a decision. Title IX might have played into it some, but yeah, it was mainly just that we lost the competition then.
Okay. I just wondered how you felt,
Yeah.
how you felt at that time when you had to,
Yeah.
step away from coaching
Right,
wrestling.
right. I substituted being the director of the Dow Center.
Okay.
That was sort of the they said, okay, you can get out of wrestling if you'd be the director of the Dow Center, because the Dow Center opened up. Yeah.
Okay. The more important question for me is, when did you come to the conclusion that what you had been raised with all your life was garbage theology? And how did you make your peace with that?
How did I make my peace with that? Well, can push me a little bit, but I would say, like I said, it was almost inevitable. I think I made my peace with that by becoming a universalist. becoming a confirmed universalist. God's welcoming all of us. We're all gonna be there. From every nation, tribe, we're gonna all be together forever in the arms of a loving God. That's it. I believe that. I just finally but it took me a lifetime. Took me a lifetime to process that. You know, I just wasn't ready to just chuck it. You know, I could have just chucked it like my brother and sister did. My brother did years later. My sister says that she was spared the struggles that my brother and I had. You know why she was spared the struggles? This is a direct quote. I could read it for if I could find it. She had the wisdom to marry a heathen. And that was the best decision she made. A heathen, Heathen, a heathen. So she was saved and spared the scramble and struggles that my brother and I went through by that decision. I don't know if that's answering it or if that's spinning it around or I don't know. Yeah. But it's an amazing with Stafford. How could you possibly get that many beatings a week and then be home with your parents for 3 months and have them not know about it? And his dad was high up in the mission in Africa. And finally, when his dad got wind of that, he of course went up there to that mission school, and those missionaries were taken to the kind of the tribunal of that mission and found guilty. But they never for a minute ever admitted that they'd ever done anything wrong. I don't know. Yeah, anybody else? Yeah.
I'm not sure I heard it. I missed it. When your parents were sent out, were they Reformed Church in America?
No, that's a good question. Good, I didn't develop that. They went out under the China Inland Mission, which is called a faith mission. Okay, and faith missions, you went out strictly on faith that God would provide. And you didn't have to, now, most missionaries have to raise their support before they go. Well, many of those missionaries did not raise their support. One man, Hudson Taylor, said, I will be responsible. You go. God has told me that the finances will be available for you to continue your work. And I'll tell you what, that mission started, he went to the first missionaries went in 1865. And in 1881, there were 240 faith missionaries in China. And he was responsible for the financial well-being of these people. What a burden for Hudson Taylor to bear. Incredible. But the stories, read Hudson Taylor's Spiritual Secret. It's unbelievable. The stories that he shares in that book. I was going to share one more thing. I brought this along. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for that question. That was my question
Yeah.
as well. So there was not a denominational affiliation.
No, it's like Wheaton College. Wheaton
Okay.
College is non-denominational. The China Mission is
Okay,
non-denominational.
so there was not any kind of oversight. There was not an
Yeah,
oversight.
you're right. No
board
governing
or
body. Yeah.
Organization.
Hudson Taylor.
You made mention that it was policy, however, that families would send their children to school at the age of 6.
Right.
Who set that policy?
Hudson Taylor and the mission board would have set that policy. Yeah, there was a board and they met. I could dig out some materials that go back into that,
Yeah.
but the board, they prayed about it, made the decision. They felt it made more sense for children to be, you just didn't, just the board of the mission made the decision.
So has there ever been, was that the case with Wesley Stafford as well? Were his parents part of the same?
Yeah, he
group?
was in a faith mission.
Okay.
I
So
believe it
has
was the
there-
African mission, although don't quote me on that one. I'm not positive.
This has
Yeah.
been published. There's information out there.
Oh, sure.
Has anyone ever been held accountable for this kind of
Yeah.
amazingly
They've got
short-sighted?
I have a couple of videos. Yes, in this case in the Stafford case, they went to the tribunal of their mission board. I didn't go to a civil court. But I believe there has been some instances of going to civil court and people being found guilty, but I can't identify one. I usually try to handle it within the mission board and the mission itself.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah. We had speaking of that, we had a chief who, they had what was called Chief Who Reconsidered. And they had it in Malaysia where we gave you that song that we had at the last session. 80 missionary kids went back to Malaysia to 50, 60 years later to share their stories. And some of the kids are so traumatized they couldn't even talk. Whereas other kids would say, this is the most enjoyable time of my entire life. And I went to one of these missions reconsidered in Philadelphia. It was the same way, just the gamut of responses from kids. But as far I'd look it up. Oh, I wanted to answer the question too. Yeah, it just sounds like off the wall, but somebody asked me about what were the porters paid. Who asked me that question? Okay, good. I did look it up. The best way to remember it is a pound of rice for a pound of tea. How's that for a response? So those they were carrying about 220 pounds. That was good for one non-chung horse. So what they were carrying in the back, but they, after the trek, would get a pound of rice for a pound. So about 220 pounds of rice is what they would get for the most part. I'm sure it varied over the centuries, but they would go back down. They would go back down and start the whole process all over again. Yeah, yeah. Was there, let's see the other questions last time. Yeah, okay.
George,
Yeah, John.
yes, there are a number of levels that people want to respond to you. And the one is how you're doing after, the treatment that you had with when you stole the stamps. And we've gone over that in our men's group,
Yeah, yeah.
but it could have been handled so much better by responsible people to say, well, George, this, you really, you can really say this because we forgive you, and there are ways of going beyond this. That was not in their DNA. They were not capable
They were not
of
capable.
handling the
Right,
situation
right,
with a child
right, right,
who was in the wrong. I
right,
mean, this
right.
this is a terrible offense. My question is, on a second level, you brought out the stuff from West Stafford, and you yourself experienced what it was like in Chifu.
Yeah,
I have a very close associate, let's say acquaintance, who went to coding school in
Cody,
India.
yeah.
And
Husuvelt, that book Elephant Baseball went to
yeah,
Cody. too.
and you know who she is, and she has read your book, and she has said, well, no, George really did okay with it. George did not do okay with it. I did it. I was okay with it. I was okay with it because I think I got to see my parents, and I don't think George was able to see his parents in a way. My question is, did you have to experience in your life there in the school the kind of degradation? I mean, we know the story about the stamp situation. That's bad enough.
Yeah.
But you quoted liberally from West Stafford, who became part of World Vision's program for a long time. Did you really go through that depth, the darkest moments, and have you emerged from that, or is it not quite as bad as West Stafford?
No, John, I think, I'm going to say this. I think the spiritual trauma that I went through was equally as great as the physical, psychological trauma that Stafford went through.
And so
You
you
can
went through
twist
that
the
physical
gospel and
stuff.
just foul up a kid. They don't know what, just, yeah. I think my abuse was as severe as Wesley Stafford's, just in a different realm, in a different way.
Yeah.
I really do, John. Like I said, but isn't that funny? I mean, I had my bare bottom smacked many times, but it was a badge of honor for me. But it wasn't like Stafford. It looked like you just brutalized him, and it must have just absolutely brutalized him in some of these meetings. But no, I think that the spiritual is just, I mean, the spiritualist for you of all people, your profession, spiritual, incorrect spiritual, let me just say it, spiritual crap, spiritual abuse can
in
be
deep
as
grief.
intense as physical
In
abuse.
deep grief over what you experienced as a child.
Yeah.
We are deeply saddened by that and hope that you come out on the other side.
Well, who knows? I'm still, I am where I am now, but I'm 84, but maybe I'll move a little bit in the next, Lord willing, in the next few years. We're getting to realize in the men's group how tenuous life can be. Yeah.
True.
Yeah. Anybody else?
But I think
Yeah.
universalism is a step in the right direction for you. I really do.
Yeah.
Okay, comment back here.
While you're doing that, I just want to share one more thing, another layer of it. We scripture memory was very, very important in our biblical school. I'd memorized the entire book of Ephesians from the King James Version, and I'd memorized just hundreds and hundreds of verses. And what they did was we had these little accordions, this 100 sheets long. And on one side of it, in perfect British penmanship, we'd have to write the verse, and then on the other side, we write the scripture passage. And you carry this in it was bamboo. This is the bad one, it was a bamboo sheet, but you carry it in your pocket. Kind of remind me of the devout Jewish rabbis who have the phylactery over their forehead and they pull down the Torah, to memorize it. We had these in our pocket. So you'd memorize hundreds and hundreds. And then when you memorized 100 verses, you'd sit for a proctored exam. This is very British school system. And if you could write out the verse in perfect British penmanship, no mistakes, no spelling errors, punctuation, all correct, you then were given 100 more verses. And so as a badge of honor, how many of these you could have stacked up in your nightstand? And the only academic thing that I could do well was memorize. I've always been able to memorize pretty well. So I had several of these stacked up. So I felt very, I have 6 or 7 of these stacked up on my nightstand. Yeah.
This is not a question so much as it is just an observation. I think spiritual abuse, particularly on the mission field, probably cut quite a wide swath, whether you were boarding school or not. I think, I just wonder if it's the nature of the missionary personality. I don't know. That would be an overgeneralization, but I've thought about that some years ago at a missionary presentation. I asked the person who at that time was responsible for global mission in the Reformed Church. I said, what kind of support are you giving missionary kids? And there was none.
Yeah.
There just was none. There certainly wasn't, when I grew up, and probably not for you either.
The nature of the personality that's called to the mission field. I think you kind of were addressing that earlier in your question. And certainly my father wasn't he typical? I think there was that you had to be had of invention and spirit from my mother to leave a secure teaching position in the middle of the Depression. Her brothers and sisters were unemployed. And my sister said that was one of the main reasons why my mother went to China, was to get away from these unemployed family that she was kind of supporting herself. But still, you got to have a certain personality type. And you're right. I think they're kind of a driven personality, and that's the way it is. Yeah. Yeah. Anything else? And anybody want to share anybody's story that you would want to share? We got a few minutes, a little quick sharing of your spiritual, when you first heard of God talk, or how you responded. And has your life switched and changed a little bit since or has your spiritual journey remained about the same, would you say? Hey, Boyd, I got to say this. I see you grinning over there. Boyd keeps it a dark secret that he went to Moody Bible Institute. I think cat's out of the bag, brother. You want to comment or just let that one lie? Come a long way. Okay, but just okay. All right. Do you want to share a little bit? Or we got a few minutes from Moody to. I'm putting you on the spot.
It's on? Okay. I always told my students, when I left Moody Bible Institute, I knew all of the answers to life's questions.
Right.
Until I learned there were a hell of a lot more questions than I had answers for.
Isn't that the truth, brother?
Yeah.
Yeah. Some people as they age get to be very set in their ways, but for Boyd and me, for sure, and for others, there just has gotten to be a hell of a lot more questions and a lot fewer answers. Yeah, you know, a lot less. I was the same. I graduated from Wheaton. I thought I had all the answers. I mean, okay. You did? Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Oh, interesting. Yeah. Anybody else? Well, I see my good friends. We were with Bill and Barb. They've already moved into the farmstead. Robbie and I are in process of moving into the farmstead.
I think all of Hass will be in the farmstead. As Kim said, it's a wonderful place.
We're looking forward to it. Okay, well, listen, if you, I'm happy to stick around for a while. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to ask, but hopefully I've honestly tried to share, you know, my story and implications of it. Hopefully it's provided some insight for you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Dr. Kraft has shared his memoir. I have it in the library, so if anyone wants to
First
check it
come,
out,
first
they
served,
can.
yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Oh, it's John, you've already got, okay. I should know.
John picked up a copy right away.
Yeah, he did. I had it front and center, so thank you for doing it and sharing your life, your story. I
Thank you
think
very
you
much.
turned out pretty well, actually,
I hope
quite
so.
well
I hope
overall,
so.
from everything, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.